Welcome to our summer learning series of 2020, where we're going to explore and share and learn about some of the new things that Pearson has been working on this year. Now, we certainly miss being able to see you face-to-face, so I'm super excited to be able to kick us off today with the second session of the learning series this week. We've got a number of great sessions coming up for the rest of the week, so this series is actually from August 24th all the way up to Friday, August 28th. So I encourage you to attend some of the other sessions as well. So for today, we will be talking about assessing preschoolers before they transition into the classroom, specifically the use of the CELF P-3. So we'll go into details about the product itself. So for the agenda today, we're going to be doing an overview of the CELF P-3, and we'll actually review each one of the subtests generally to see what they are like, some of the new subtests that have been added, and the new scale scores as well. Number two, we'll talk about what has changed with the new release of the P3, and then how to use your digital assets. So I personally have been really active since I would say January of this year talking about the CELF P3, and I've had many questions about the new digital assets that are now available. So the fact that the CELF P3 is now on QGlobal and will eventually be on QInteractive, I hope that today I can answer all of these frequently asked questions. But of course, if there are any additional questions, just let us know. If you can just put it in the chat box, and of course, we will reach out to you. I always like to start with this slide here, which goes to show our team in Canada. We're a relatively small team. We work very collaboratively together. I encourage you all to take a quick look to see who is your assessment consultant for your geographical section, so where you are from. We have a few people here listed. So we've got Michael Sharon, who is the assessment consultant for both Ontario and Manitoba, and I've got the contact details right below here, his email and direct phone number. We've got, secondly, Pierre Choquette, who is responsible for all customers who are residing in Quebec, who are English and French speaking. And by the way, I'm just having a quick note here that I might not be speaking loud enough. If someone could just write in the chat box and let me know if the audio is okay, and then we'll go ahead and proceed. That would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. Number three, we've got Madeira. Now, she is responsible for a larger region, so bear with me. She is responsible for Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, PEI, Newfoundland, and Labrador, Saskatchewan, Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut as well. Of course, there's myself, Samuel Rousseau, who is responsible for both beautiful British Columbia, beautiful Alberta as well. And lastly, we have Jeremy Clark, who is responsible for all of Canada, but who supports all of us in terms of the digital transformation, online platforms, and things like that. He's a really good resource to have, and I highly recommend to connect with any of us to answer some of your questions when it comes to product guidance, or even telepractice questions, or questions about our platforms in general. We often lead trainings and in-depth webinars like this one, but that is a little bit more personalized to you and your team. So feel free to reach out to us. And by the way, if you ever lose our contact information, we are on the PearsonClinical.ca website. So if you actually go there, at the top right corner, there's a little button that says Contact. And if you hover over it, there will be a button that says Assessment Consultants. And by clicking on it, you will be taken to a page that looks very similar to the page that I had just shown, with all of our details, phone numbers, and email. So let's begin and talk about the CELF P3. All right, so when it comes to the CELF P3, the question that we're really trying to answer is, do your preschoolers have the language skills that they need to transition into the classroom? Now, the CELF P3 is a newly published assessment, and it can help you to answer this very question. When I describe it to customers, regardless of if you're familiar with the previous editions or you're new to the CELF P family, I usually say that it's a flexible, it's individually administered, and it's a highly accurate assessment that's used to determine if children from ages 3 all the way up to 6 years and 11 months have the language skills they need in order to handle the language demands of the classroom. It is a level B assessment, and it is currently available in print or digital. And I'll go into a little bit more details a little bit later in this webinar about what that means, because there are a couple digital options, and I want to clarify that for you. Now, the CELF P-3 subtests do parallel the CELF 5 subtest. So if you're familiar with the CELF 5, it's very similar in terms of the task that you're asking the child to do. And typically the core language score and the receptive language index, and as well as the expressive language index, is often the scores that are reported as part of your comprehensive assessment that includes additional measures. So of course you might have, for example, parent-teacher interviews, observations, language sampling, dynamic assessments, and all of these would help you support that diagnostic decision that you might do for that child. I like this chart here. It's a quick snapshot of all of the CELF P-3 subtests and the tasks that the little kiddos are asked to perform. So I think for today, what I thought would be useful is to go through each subtest to see what is it that we're actually asking the child to do. And by doing so, I'll also go into details about the new subtests that have been added for the CELF P-3. So let's jump into it. Now, I do have to say that I was not able to put in live items of the CELF P-3. So all of the pictures that you see today on the webinar are not actual items and not actual artwork. If you are interested in seeing what it looks like, I highly encourage you to connect with your assessment consultant so they can do maybe a one-on-one or a session with your team to actually show you what the items look like. So let's begin, right? So the sentence comprehension subtest, in this case, the child identifies a picture that matches the sentence read out loud by the examinee. So as you can see in front of you, there are 4 pictures. And I would say something like, let's look at these pictures. Point to the picture that shows your assessment consultant for BC and Alberta. Now, hopefully, because this is a trial item, they'll say, of course, it's the bottom right picture that is Samuel Rousseau, the assessment consultant for BC and Alberta. Now, you would do this for ages 3 to 6. There is 1 allowed repetition, and the discontinue rule is 5, meaning that once the child has got 5 consecutive 0 score answers, then you would move on to the next subtest. Now we're going to stick to a more Canadian theme for our pictures. So in word structure, the child completes a sentence with the target structure. So for example, you can see there are 2 pictures, and I would say something like this. I'm going to show you some pictures and say some things about them. I want you to help me by finishing some of the things that I say. So let's try one. Here on the left is a bear, and here on the right is a blank, and hopefully they say a beaver. And you would continue to do sort of these items with, you would continue on with the same sort of task with future items. It is the same as before, so you do this for ages 3 to 6. There is 1 allowed repetition for test items, and the discontinue rule is also 5. All right, let's move on to expressive vocabulary. So in this subtest, the child names an object or person or an activity portrayed in the picture. So I've got a picture showing right now, and I would say, look at this picture. What is this? Now they might say, it's a canoe made of great Canadian maple wood, and you would say, that is correct. And this is the same as before, so you would do this for ages 3 to 6. There is 1 allowed repetition, and the discontinue rule is also 5 for expressive vocabulary. Now for following directions, in this subtest, the child points to pictures in response to oral directions. So it's pretty self-explanatory in terms of what you're trying to do. You're asking them to essentially follow the directions. And so in this case, I have lots of pictures showing, and I would say, look at these animals. Point to the animal that is gray. Point to the animal that can fly. Point to the one that has antlers. And you would do this for ages 3 to 6 as well. In this case, there's actually 0 allowed repetition, so you can't repeat the task. And items 1 to 4 actually do not have a discontinue rule, and items 5 to 24 have a discontinue rule of 5. All right, so now for recalling sentences. The child imitates sentences presented by the examiner. So I've got an example here. You can sort of read it through, but I'm going to say something to you, and I want you to listen carefully and say exactly what I say. Let's try one. I really like this Canadian theme. Now you say it. You would ask the child to repeat that sentence, and you would write down the response. You do this for ages 3 to 6. There is also 0 allowed repetition for these test items, and the discontinue rule is set to 3 this time. For the basics concepts subtests, the child points to a picture that illustrates the target concept presented by the examiner. So in this case, I would say something like, let's look at these things here. Point to the one that is served over pancakes. Hopefully they point to the maple syrup on the right side of the screen. You would do this for ages 3 to 6. There is 0 allowed repetition, and the discontinue rule is 3. Now for the famous word class subtest. So in this subtest, the child chooses 2 words or pictures that are related to each other from a choice of 3 or 4 words or pictures. So in this case, I've got a couple logos and a globe. So I would say 2 of these words go together: QGlobal, QInteractive, and Planet Earth. Which one goes together? Now, of course, it's QGlobal and QInteractive, which are 2 digital platforms that we have for the CELF P-3. And the odd one out would be the globe, right? So you do this for ages 4 to 6. There is 1 allowed repetition, and the discontinue rule is set to 5. Now for phonological awareness, so the child in this case would rhyme words or blend them and identify sounds and syllables. You would do this for ages 4 to 6, 1 allowed repetition, and the discontinue rule is set to 3. Now it's important, one quick note about this subtest is if the child does not understand the task, even after teaching and prompting, you can skip ahead over to the next section, which would be rhyming, for example. Other sort of measures embedded within the subtest is compound words and syllable blending. So in this case here, I have written down, I'm going to clap for each part of the word I say. Listen carefully and watch me. Clap for each syllable. Cedar tree, and you would clap 3 times. And now you try it. And now we get to some of the interesting sort of new additions to CELF P-3. Now, from speaking with a lot of different customers, I came to sort of understand that a lot of these things were already being done. Even as a CELF P2 user, you would always sort of get additional information to help you with your comprehensive assessment. The benefit now is that sort of we've added these subtests to be included, and it is sort of more standardized. It is part of a new scale score that it gives you. And it's all part of the CELF P-3 kit that you can now get. So for the descriptive pragmatics profile and preliteracy rating scale, so the DPP or the PRS, the examiner provides or elicits information from a respondent about the child's early reading or writing skills. It's provided as part of the record form, but it can also be purchased separately on an easy tear-off pad. And the reason for that is there might be situations where you want to get this information from multiple sources, right? So you can get someone such as the caregiver or the teacher or even the examiner himself or herself to fill out this, this form. Of course, people who are familiar with the child and his or her background and culture should be the ones who are filling this out. Now, the DPP specifically, so the descriptive pragmatics profile, provides a scale score and it contributes to the academic readiness score. The DPP is also used to determine if a child demonstrates nonverbal and verbal behaviors that might influence social and academic communication. The behavior evaluator common daily skills observed across all ages and genders in home and also in the classroom that are necessary to express attention. So as you can see on the, so this is an actual item from the DPP. So there are nonverbal conversational routines and skills, asking for, giving, and responding to information. So you would essentially just score from 3 all the way up to 0, or there is an NA option as well. So 3 being always or almost always, 0 being never and or almost never, or NA, which would be non-appropriate. Now for the Preliteracy rating scale, I want to give you an example of that too. So as you can see, there's a couple items here that are showing one for early reading skills and the other one for early writing skills. So it's the same idea here. You would just rate from 0 to 3, right? So 0 being never or almost never, and 3 being always or almost always. And of course the NA option if it's not appropriate. So for early reading skills, an example would be the child holds the book right side up. Or for writing skills, you might say the child writes, draws, or scribbles to imitate writing. Now for the next subtest, it's called the Connected Speech Sample, or CSS. And in this subtest, the child retells a story read out loud by the examiner. Now this book was beautifully crafted by our authors, and it describes a harrowing tale of betrayal and ultimate redemption in a childlike manner, of course. And so what you would do is you would present the No Juice book to the child, you would read the story, and you make sure that the child is actually following along. After you read the story, you can ask them to retell it. You record the child's retell verbatim on the record form. Now for a lot of folks, I think what I see them doing is actually record this part of the subtest so that they can transcribe it later, which is okay to do. Now for the Pragmatic Activities Checklist, again, this is a supplementary subtest. I do think that a lot of examiners were doing activities like this to take little breaks, for example, in between subtests, or to create rapport with the child. But now it's included within the CELF P-3. So in this subtest, the examiner elicits information about the child's interactions by initiating at least 3 of the suggested activity. So you can hopefully see here in front of you some of the suggested activities. So there's an art activity, have a snack, play with toys, construct something, teach and play a game, or talk about a movie from a website. So the purpose here is to identify, again, these verbal and nonverbal behavior that the child exhibits in social interactions that may interfere with effective communication in home and in school settings. It provides a checklist of communication behavior, essentially. Now, you could observe the child while taking part of these activities throughout the time with him or her. The behaviors are developmental, depending on the child's age. As I said, there are 6 activities that you can do with them. They take about 3 to 5 minutes each to do. And I see this being used often to create rapport with the child, or it can be used to act as a sort of a natural break in between sessions. Now, the responses that are recorded in here can actually be compared to some of the information that you get from the descriptive pragmatics profile. And this would essentially create a more comprehensive picture of the child's social and conversational interactions. And that is all the subtests. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what has changed. I think the biggest one that a lot of people were sort of commenting or asking us to change or remove were some of the older items, right? You have to remember that the CELF P2 is now over 15 years old, right? So a lot of children these days might not know what a newspaper is, or a calculator that looks like this, or a phone. So I'm glad to say we've removed these items, and we have adjusted the art. So we've made changes to the art itself and created some new items there that I think are more relevant to today's population. And so I'm really happy to see that as one of the major changes of the CELF P-3. Secondly, there are new digital as well as print administration options. Now, I have 2 logos here. One is for QGlobal, the one on the left, and one is for QInteractive, the one on the right. I highly encourage you to go to the website. I have it written down here. It's helloq.ca, so Hello and the letter Q.ca, if you want to have more information about QGlobal or QInteractive. Now, for the purpose of this webinar, because I get this question all the time is, well, what is the difference between QGlobal and QInteractive? So on the left, you've got a screenshot of QGlobal, and on the right, there's sort of a little demonstration or illustration of what QInteractive is. The way I usually describe it to customers is that QGlobal is essentially a scoring system, most often used as a scoring system. So people would use it in such a way where they're doing a paper and pencil administration, so traditional kits, but then putting the scores into QGlobal so that it can spit out a nice interpretive report with graphs and things like that. I have to admit, for SLPs, maybe not used as often in this manner, because typically I think a lot of times the record form is sufficient, but that is an option with many of the SLP assessments or the speech and language assessments in general. Now, one of the added features of QGlobal is what we call the resource library. So the resource library is all of the digital assets that you purchase from Pearson. So digital manuals or digital STEM books, for example, they're all accessible within the resource library. It is essentially a PDF file that you have access to once you purchase them within that resource library. So for some people, they have considered using some of those materials for the purpose of remote administration, but I will talk a little bit about that in just a few moments. The other way that it can be used is for questionnaire-based assessments, which is not the case for the CELF P-3, but if you had questionnaire-based assessments through QGlobal, you can actually send the questionnaire out to the parent or the teacher, but that is not the case with the CELF P-3. So if we compare that to QInteractive, which is a completely separate platform, they are not related to each other at all whatsoever. QInteractive is really an app that you download from the App Store. It is on iOS only, where it would essentially replace your record form and also your STEM book. And so when I describe it to customers, I say it's really a platform for your administration, your scoring, and your reporting all together. There are some benefits to using QGlobal and some benefits for using QInteractive and some disadvantage for using QGlobal or using QInteractive. And so when trying to decide which one is right for you, we do have a chart that is available on the CELF P-3 website that you can take a look at. Of course, there's paper, your traditional kits, which are always sort of reliable. You don't have to worry about technology or internet connections or things like that. You've got two options for digital. So QGlobal would be if you want to use the STEM books, the manuals on a computer or a tablet. But one of the disadvantages would be that you would require internet access in order to access the materials. Whereas with QInteractive, the advantage would be that you don't need internet for an administration. It's very, very interactive between the examiner and the examinee. The examiner actually controls what the examinee sees within their own iPad. They sort of can control it themselves. But the disadvantage being is that you do need two iPads in order to be able to use QInteractive. So if you're not sure about what option is best for you, I highly recommend to connect with your assessment consultant, because we can do a demonstration of each one to show you how you could use each one of these kits. As I've already mentioned, one of the new features is the new connected speech task and the pragmatic activities checklist. So I'm not going to talk about that again. One that I haven't really mentioned is the new screener option. Now, this is actually available in print or QGlobal. One thing to note about the screener is that it is a separate kit. So it has a separate manual, a separate STEM book, and a separate record form. However, it does use some of the subset of the items from the full diagnostic assessment. Therefore, if you choose to assess a child further after you have screened them, you can easily transfer over the scores from the CELF P-3 screening record form to the full diagnostic assessment. Other new features that I think are worth noting is there are easier test items at the beginning of the test to improve the floor for 3 to 6-year-olds. This was some of the comments that we had received from customers, so I'm glad to see that as one of the changes that we have made. And then lastly, the new norms based on current status. So of course, lots has changed in the last 15 years. And so if anything, the use of the CELF P-3 I think is a really great idea simply for the fact that it contains the new norms as well. Now, these are some of the frequently asked questions that I get from customers, and so I wanted to put them on here. So one of the questions that I get often is, should I use the PLS-5, the CELF P-3, but there are also other preschool language tests out there, so why should I choose the CELF P-3? My comment on that is that for many clinicians, in fact, both the PLS-5 and the CELF P-3 are actually needed in their test closet to be able to use the test that is most appropriate for the child that you're testing. So for the CELF P-3, the child still needs to be able to complete sentences, for example. It's really assessing the language skills. So, if you have a caseload of children who are not significantly delayed, but have specific difficulties in specific language areas, the CELF P-3 might be really appropriate for them, whereas someone who may be significantly delayed might want to be assessed using the PLS-5 would be sort of my recommendation for that. The CELF P-3, right, it provides an in-depth information about the child's mastery of the language skills. Another question that I get often is, why is the CELF P-3 a significant revision? So I hope that by today's session, you were able to really understand that some of the new features, the fact that it now is available digitally, the fact that there is a screener now available, that it has updated norms and updated test items would warrant sort of the new edition, and it is quite a significant change from previous editions. How does the screener work? Well, I'm not going to answer that question again, but I do get that question quite a bit. So I hope that what I described a few moments ago made sense in terms of being able to use it as a separate kit, but then transferring over the scores into the full diagnostic assessment. Can the CELF P-3 be used in telepractice or remote administration? Okay, so I get this question a lot, especially lately with everything that has been going on. So one thing that I can say is that it's always up to the clinician, right? You guys are the ones who are regulated or have a license to practice. And of course, you can always make that sort of clinical decision to assess someone remotely if you feel they're a good candidate and that there's reliable internet and things like that. But I do have to say that for the CELF P-3, we have not indicated that it is an approved assessment for telepractice. So we have not developed any guidelines or recommendations on how to use it in telepractice. There certainly is the material available for it. So your digital QGlobal library could be used for that purpose. But I think at this point, being that it's a new product, we feel that with assessing really young children, it becomes extremely hard to be able to assess them in a valid and reliable manner through video. If you disagree with that or agree with it, feel free to share your thoughts within the chat box, because I think the more we have sort of this communication between ourselves and the customers, we'll really see whether people feel comfortable using in telepractice or if they don't. But I can tell you that as of now, it is not sort of an approved measure for telepractice. One of the last questions I have here is, what are the digital stimulus books and how can they be used? So because we are slowly running out of time, I'm going to go straight into this. So QGlobal is, as I mentioned, there is a digital library that is available within your QGlobal account. Having a QGlobal account doesn't actually cost anything. So as long as you're registered with us and you have a level B credential registered within our systems, you'll be able to request for a QGlobal account. So if you don't have one already, head over to helloq.ca where you can actually make a request for a QGlobal account. What we actually charge for would be what you put into your QGlobal account. So that could be like a scoring subscription, score reports, or of course your digital assets, so your PDF files for the digital stim books or the manuals. Now you can consider the use of these digital materials to help facilitate with administration. So we do have them available for the CELF 5, the CELF P-3, the PPPT, the EVT, the Goldman-Fristow, and others. So just a quick note on that. In efforts to help where we can during the pandemic, there is currently a 50% off promo that will end at the end of this year if you want to purchase digital assets for your speech and language assessments. Excuse me. Now, a quick note, the CELF P-3 is not included in that promo, and that's just because it is a brand new assessment. But as far as the CELF 5 or the PPBT, the EVT, the Goldman-Fristow, all of those are offered at 50% off for your digital resources. So if you want to view those resources once you've purchased them, you would just head over to your resource library, navigate to that test folder, and open the restricted folder. If you don't see it within there, it doesn't mean that that the digital assets aren't in your account. It could mean that it is in your inventory, but it hasn't been allocated to your username. So I always give the example, for example, in a situation where there might be, let's say, 10 SLPs working together, but only 5 digital kits available. Of course, they can sort of share this kit, but note that only one person can use one kit at a time. So we call this process of allocating and deallocating digital STEM books or manuals to individual users. So once you're done using it, it's important to deallocate that and put it back into the resource library so that somebody else can then allocate it to themselves when they're ready to use it. Now, you can consider the use of these STEM books for remote assessments, but please follow the product page recommendations. So if you visit the product page at PearsonClinical.ca and look up the actual product that you're wanting to do remotely, there is a telepractice tab, and it has lots of recommendations and guidelines about which subtests you can do, which ones you can't do, and also some of the research that we've included to help support and help validate the use of this assessment through telepractice. And again, I repeat, there's no guidelines or recommendations available for the CELF P-3 at this time. Once you open up your STEM books or your manuals, I have a picture here of a iPad. It doesn't have to be an iPad, it could be a computer, but you would be able to pull up the STEM book within your tablet or your computer. And this is great for traveling SLPs or traveling psychologists, for example, who don't want to carry around the STEM book with them. It's also much easier to clean and disinfect a tablet than it would be of each page of a STEM book, for example. So a lot of people are considering the digital assets for this reason too. The other thing is you never have to worry about forgetting your materials. So if you are at home finishing a report and you suddenly realize that you forgot the manual in your office or in the schools, well, you'll have access to those anywhere that you are, as long as you have internet connection, a web browser, your username, and your password. On the flip side, though, Wi-Fi is required to access them, so that is just one thing to know. So as we finish up this webinar, let's do a quick recap, right? So what is the CELF P-3? The CELF P-3 is a diagnostic tool that can be part of a comprehensive assessment to help identify students who might be struggling with specific language skills. It's about assessing preschoolers before they transition into the classroom. I think that we can all agree that it is extremely important now, probably more than ever, to identify those kids as early as possible to enable early intervention. As children go back to school, it will be extremely important to ensure that no child gets left behind. Of course, if there's a backlog of assessing to do, then utilize the screener, the CELF P-3 screener, to help you through that workload. I find that I know it's not just SLPs that use the CELF P-3, but if you are an SLP, quite often you might be that first point of contact for a lot of these children in terms of doing a full diagnostic assessment. And so you're able to really be able to identify some of their needs quite early on. So consider the CELF P-3 as part of your toolkit. It's not the be-all, end-all, but it is a great tool to be added to your toolkit, and it will help you to investigate the specific referral question that you have at hand. So this concludes this part of this webinar. I just wanted to quickly mention that there are some great webinars coming up this week. Tomorrow, my colleague Nadira will be presenting on AimsWeb, specifically on how to create plans for student success in wellness. Michael, on the next day, so on Thursday, August 27, will be talking about supporting student mental health at home and at school. And I think a really popular webinar that's also coming up is Jeremy Clark's on Friday, August 28th, specifically about technology and telepractice. And this is both for beginners and advanced users. Again, if you feel like you need a little bit more, or you want to go a little bit more in depth, feel free to connect specifically with your assessment consultant, and we can arrange an hour-long meeting, let's say, with you one-on-one or with your team. So that is it for now. So I will go ahead and take questions. So I'm just going to go through this one list here. So will you be talking about administration via telepractice? So I think I did mention that already. So specifically, when it comes to telepractice, like I said, the CELF P-3 is not officially approved as an assessment that you can use remotely. Again, we feel that assessing really, really young children, it becomes very difficult to do so remotely. However, I can imagine that as time goes by, there will be more research to help validate this type of assessment with young kids. And so I'm not saying that in the future it might not be possible. It might be. But for the time being, we've remained a little bit conservative with that specific question. Okay, what is the difference between the full assessment and the screening test? The screening test is extremely short, so it takes about 8 to 10 minutes to complete. And again, it's to help with the workload. So if you have a lot of people that you have to assess within the year, you may want to use the screening test for this reason. And then from that, decide whether you should fully administer the CELF P-3. When would I use the PLS-5 over the CELF P-3? So I could talk a little bit about that already. I've heard that the pre-publication pricing for the CELF P-3 is still valid. How long will it be available for? So this is actually a really great question. Pre-publication pricing is 10% off of the CELF P-3 kits. It is available until the end of this week. So if you haven't purchased the CELF P-3 yet, it's a great opportunity to do so. And of course, as part of attending this webinar, you will also be receiving a discount code, which will be 10% off and free shipping. So if you're purchasing the CELF P-3, I would actually recommend using the promo code from the Summer Learning Series as opposed to the CELF P-3 pre-publication pricing, because they're both 10% off, but one will give you the free shipping on top of it. Are there any flyers or brochures or recaps that I can share with my colleagues? Absolutely. If you head over to the product page of the CELF P-3 and click on the resource page, you will see many different brochures and things that you can share with your colleagues that basically recaps everything that we've discussed today. And of course, you'll have access to my PowerPoint slide, which you can easily share with others if you'd like. And the video recording for this webinar will also be available. Can you repeat when the CELF P-3 will be available for QInteractive? So I do apologize, I wasn't very clear on that. So the CELF P-3 is currently available in traditional paper and pencil, and also on QGlobal digital platform. This includes the screener or the full diagnostic assessment. There will be a QInteractive adaptation that will be made, but that one will only be released later this year. So we're hoping around November or December of this year is when it will be released. So those are your options for you. So if I can't use the CELF P-3 in telepractice, how can I use it appropriately in person? So this is a great question. So we have some great information and details about the use of PPE and guidelines in terms of disinfecting our test materials. It's available within the telepractice page at PearsonClinical.ca. If you have any trouble finding that page, please let one of us know and we can help you direct you to that page. But essentially, it can still be done in person using PPE materials. Some people have opted to use a sort of a barrier between themselves and the examinee, which is completely fine. Others have considered the use of the QGlobal digital assets to put it on a tablet versus a stim book, which is a little bit easier to clean and disinfect. So there's a few sort of ways to do that. All right, a question about how to allocate and deallocate the resources in QGlobal. There are materials within QGlobal that shows you screenshots about how to do that. So when you log into QGlobal, there is a little button at the top right corner that says Help. If you click on Help, it takes you to the user guide for QGlobal. If you type in managing digital assets, allocating, deallocating, it should take you to a step-by-step on how to allocate and deallocate. But just to quickly talk about that, you do have to be either an account owner of QGlobal or have administrative rights to be able to allocate and deallocate. So if you don't have those rights, unfortunately, you have to ask the administrator or the account owner of the organization that you work for in order to do that. There are ways that we can set up your user role to include access to be able to do that. So again, if you have any questions or you're a little bit confused about that or need some guidance, contact your assessment consultant. We can actually sit down with you to take a look at your account to see what would be the best way to organize your QGlobal account. There was a question about, so if I have purchased the print form already, but I want to use QInteractive later, will this be available or do I have to purchase another set? So again, QGlobal or the traditional paper pencil kits, it's completely separate from QInteractive. So what I would advise is for those who haven't purchased the CELF P-3 yet, but want to use QInteractive, to actually wait a little bit until the QInteractive version comes out. You can certainly still use the CELF P-2 until the CELF P-3 QInteractive version comes out. And for those who have already purchased it, I know that for organization, it's really typical for some individuals who prefer, who might prefer having the paper pencil kits over QInteractive because it is, it is a huge shift. It's a digital transformation. There's a learning curve that takes place when switching over to QInteractive, and some people just don't really like it, right? So I would recommend, if possible, to actually utilize both. So perhaps have one kit as a spare, and then a QInteractive subscription for those who want to use the digital administration using the iPads. The other last thing that I'll add with that too is that with QInteractive, it is a subscription-based model. So as part of your subscription, you'll have access to up to 4 instruments. So if you do decide to move over to QInteractive, you're not only purchasing a subscription for the CELF P-3, but also for access of other assessments like the PPVT, the EVT, or the CELF 5. Now, that is all the questions that I have here. I think there has been a lot of interest within this whole realm of QGlobal and telepractice. So I really recommend for all of you to attend Jeremy's session on Friday, which will perhaps answer a lot of your questions about telepractice and really show a nice demonstration of how you could do this. If you need any more details or specifics about how to do that, just connect with one of us and we can actually sit down one-to-one or with your team to do a more in-depth presentation. Now, again, here are the contact details for all of your assessment consultants: Michael Sharon, Pierre Choquette, Nadira Chen, myself, and Jeremy Clark. And again, I just want to remind everybody that as part of joining this webinar today, in appreciation for your attendance, you will receive an email sometime early next week. It will contain the promo code that you can use for 10% off and free shipping on your next order until September 30th. So you can actually use that discount code upon your checkout online at PearsonClinical.ca. Or if you call in for your order and talk to customer service, you can mention the discount code and they'll just apply it to your order before it is invoiced. So guys, again, I just want to thank you so much for attending today's session. We really do miss seeing you face to face. I think this was one of the reasons why we developed this summer learning series. We can't wait to get back on the road and to be able to speak with you face to face. Again, we are here to help you and to support you through some of these crazy times that we are in with the whole pandemic and everything that's happening. So any sort of questions, or if you need any support, please reach out to us. We will be so happy to help you throughout these difficult times. Thank you again. I hope everybody has an amazing week. Have a great day. Again, my name is Samuel Rousseau, and we'll talk to you soon, okay? Have a great day, everyone.